Donald Trump just spoke at the UN Assembly and did an incredible job of explaining how the entire Canadian economy setup is a total scam, exposing what he called the climate hoax. So Trump just spoke at the UN and went into detail on the history of so-called global warming, which, if you were not aware, up until about 1978 was referred to as global cooling. Then they switched the terminology over to global warming, and how it's part of essentially a communist plot to control the population. He detailed the so-called carbon footprint, which they are attempting to implement in Canada right now. Mark Carney is one of the strictest adherents to this climate cult, which, funny enough, he's actually under investigation by the DOJ in the United States for creating a climate cartel and forcing companies to go along with green initiatives or face severe repercussions. Also, funny enough, that Mark Carney has profited tens of millions of dollars from green initiatives. So it just so happens that his great virtuousness in wanting to save the planet happens to coincide with lining his pocketbooks like you wouldn't believe. But Trump talked about how the carbon footprint is going to be used in the future to control the population, to force the population to scan cards in order to have the ability to utilize their car, in order to purchase meat, in order to take a flight. And if you are going over your so-called carbon allowance, which, by the way, Mark Carney and his ilk don't have to worry about. Carney's taken about 25 jet planes all over the planet, but a man like Mark Carney need not worry about that type of thing. It's just for us peasants who need to be concerned with our carbon allowance. But these carbon footprints, which Mark Carney spoke about extensively in his book Values, quite an ironic title, Values, that they want to implement in Canada alongside digital IDs. This is not some dystopian nightmare. The UN spells this out in several different papers that they have written, and Carney has certainly co-signed. In the very near future, they want to implement so-called carbon allowances, which would allow each human being in a country like Canada to only emit a certain amount of carbon over the course of the year. And they track every single emission that you make, and once you have reached over your monthly allotment, no longer will you be allowed to purchase meat in a grocery store, or your vehicle will be disabled because you have gone over your so-called carbon allowance for the day. Now, to those of us who are awake, this is clearly just a method to implement authoritarianism. They need a front, so they say it's for the climate. But anybody who looks into Mark Carney's lifeless eyes and his passionless words, it's very obvious that this man is a tool for evil in the world, and that's what he's looking to do. But Trump went through the history of the so-called climate crisis and how, from a historical perspective, what we're seeing right now in terms of the climate change is actually not extreme at all. And over short periods of time, the definition of what exactly climate change has changed incredibly rapidly. It's a front for tyrannical authoritarianism. And in Canada, we have now based our entire economy on this scam. Most Canadians are shocked to understand how, in a country with the absolutely incredible natural resources that we have, the stunning natural resources, the second largest land mass of any country in the world, only 32 million people in the country in 2015, the perfect setup. Why is our economy worse than the G7? Why is our unemployment rate 7.1%? Why are there a record over 2 million Canadians using food banks? Why is the youth male unemployment rate 22%? You want to know what's playing a massive role? This climate scam BS, where we refuse to export LNG. Liquefied natural gas, which weighs 1/600th normal gas, is 50% cleaner than coal. Germany, Japan, China, begging. Olaf Scholz was in Canada a couple of years ago, begging Justin Trudeau to export LNG to Germany. But the Liberals, despite the fact that by their own metrics, this would be brilliant for the climate, exporting LNG. Canada is only about 1.5% to 2% of the total emissions in the world, but Germany, Japan, and China are particularly China, are much larger emitters of gas. So if we were to export LNG, which is 50% higher than what they burn in these countries, we could make a real impact. But the Liberal Party can't profit. They can't profit from exporting LNG. Just shows you what crooks they are, what a facade this whole thing is. We waste tens of billions of dollars in this country, tens of billions of dollars on so-called green initiatives that are actually fronts to get people like Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau rich as hell, while the standard of living, energy costs continue to go up for your average Canadian. Somehow Justin Trudeau's net worth went from a couple million when he was elected in 2015 to over $300 million in 2025 when he left office on a salary of about 400 grand. Can anybody please explain to me how that happens? But the Canadian economy is intentionally being destroyed so that a very small percentage of people through so-called green initiatives can make money hand over fist. Of the 10 major infrastructure projects that Mark Carney spoke about last week, 7 involve assets that he is directly going to make money in through Brookfield Asset Management. When Carney talks about green initiatives being a necessity in Canada, look into his investments in Brookfield Asset Management. He's invested in oil all over the place, just not in Canada. Rules for thee, not for me. If we don't wake up as Canadians incredibly soon and realize that our economy is intentionally being driven into the ditch by these lifeless global elitists like Mark Carney, who do not give a crap that 70,000 excess Canadians are dying a year in our overrun hospitals, who do not give a crap that our economy is in the absolute shitter due to their ridiculous policies, who do not give a crap about the fact that this country has transformed like you wouldn't believe over the past decade under these woke ideologues, climate scamming know-nothings like Justin Trudeau, like Mark Carney, like his rapidly dissolving climate. And I just want to say thank you to Donald Trump for having the guts to go out there and talk about this scam, this hoax that is being perpetrated on us by our leaders. What it really is a guise to implement digital IDs, carbon footprints, to get more and more control over the population. It's really all about control for these sickos. They dress it up in a nice woke veneer, but they're really authoritarians and they can't hide it for very long. Canadians, we need to stand up and say, we could have one of the strongest economies in the world. We have a great people. We have the most beautiful country in the world. We need to stand up and fight for our country. Enough of these climate scammers who get themselves rich while the rest of us get poorer and poorer. Over 2 million Canadians using food banks a year. It is time for Canadians to rise up and say, we are not going to be scammed anymore. Please like, share, subscribe, join, become a member if you want to help support my work. It takes a lot of effort to get these videos out, but I want to thank Donald Trump for going out and speaking in front of the UN. Really appreciate it. Takes stones to do that, absolutely. If you're watching on TikTok, make sure you're following YouTube, youtube.com/@FightForCanada2025. Canadians need to stand up and say no to Mark Carney and his climate hoaxing comrades.